Hey guys, welcome to another video. In this video I'll be showing you how I level my cakes to ensure that I get a very flat and smooth cake. This is the final product. Let's get into it. So equipment you'll need is just a container for the cake scraps and a knife. You also need, of course, your cakes. I've got 2 red velvets here which I just baked, so just wrapped it up in some cling film, 2 vanilla cakes here, and I have 1 Oreo sponge cake here. So let's get started. First of all, I'm starting off with my red velvet cakes. So all the cakes are 5 inches in this video, and I am starting off with my red velvet, taking a knife and basically making an imprint around the cake, just around the top of the cake, making an imprint around the same level. This cake was quite domed at the top when it came out of the oven, so I'm taking quite a bit off. Usually I wouldn't take off this amount of cake. This is where the container comes handy. You just put the cake scraps in the container, and this is the final product. So now moving on to my vanilla cakes. I've got 2 vanilla sponges here. You'll see that the top one is stuck to the baking tin a bit, but not a problem, it still came out quite well. So I'm using my knife to make an imprint around the cake, just making an imprint around it whilst I'm turning my turntable. And this allows me to make an equal imprint around the cake. And then once I come back around on myself, I then continue to go round and bring the knife inwards. And this is how it looks. It's just come off one piece, very clean. I'm now going to do the top, and you'll be able to see a bit clearer here. So I've got my knife and I'm just making a very, very light imprint around the cake, and I'm moving the turntable at the same time. So I'm not actually cutting into the cake, I'm just making an imprint. And then once I've come back around on myself like I have now, I continue going, but this time I'm bringing the knife inwards. So I can continue going, but I'm just bringing the knife deeper and deeper inside the cake. And you should get the top layer of the cake like that. Now moving on to my second vanilla, I'm doing exactly the same. This is the bottom of the cake, but the same principle applies. Around the cake with an imprint, and then when you come back on yourself, you just keep on going whilst bringing the knife deeper and deeper into the cake until we have the bottom of the cake off, like that. And I basically flip this around and do the same thing for the top of the cake. Imprint all the way round until we come back on ourselves, like so. And then you bring the knife deeper into the cake until the top layer of the cake comes off and you have your flat layer. So this is actually how I flatten all my cakes. I don't use any cake levelers. I find this just that bit easier, and it's using the tools that you have at home, like a knife and just a turntable. So I don't use any cake levelers. I've done exactly the same for the Oreo cake, and we see it is flat here. I did have a bit of a ridge, but that can be covered up with icing. So once I'm all done, it's now time to stack my cakes. A very handy tip that I've learned is to actually do this on a turntable using cling film, so you can wrap up the rubbish like that and just chuck it straight in the bin instead of having to clean your turntable time and time. So we have all our cakes flattened and we have them stacked, and you put it on top of each other, and I always do this for every one of my cakes. I usually stack them before putting any icing to see if there are any things that could cause any instability in the cake. So like you can see with this one, the layers are pretty much fine. However, the red velvet layer, the way it's baked, has baked a bit inwards, and this can happen when the cake shrinks in the oven, especially if they're left in there for too long. So what I like to do after stacking my cakes without any icing is go around with a knife. And with this knife, I will basically flatten and make sure I level the corners of my cake to make sure that they are flush against each other. Now, I know many bakers don't tend to do this step, but I like to add it in just to make sure that I don't get any surprises when I am actually stacking my cake with icing. So I just put them on top of each other without any icing, making sure that they are level and flat against the sides. You pretty much want to make sure that all the layers on the sides are the same level. And wherever there are any imbalances, I just scrape it off, really, just shave it off. Of course, you have to be careful and make sure that you're pausing regularly to see the comparison between the other layers, unless you will end up with a lopsided cake. So you may be wondering, why does this actually happen? Well, the reality of it is, even though these are all 5-inch cakes and they've been baked in a 5-inch tin, because they are different cakes and therefore they are different recipes, they will bake differently. So you'll see that I am scraping off the majority of the red velvet cake as opposed to the vanilla cake or the Oreo cake at the top. This is because these are mainly sponge-based cakes, whilst the red velvet is not. But it's nothing that a good knife and some patience can't fix. So once I'm all done, this is the look of the cake. The sides are all aligned and it is ready to be iced. So now that I'm ready to ice my cake, I've got my turntable, my non-slip mat, of course I've got the cakes in the background, and I've got my cake board. For this cake, I'll be using buttercream. This is vanilla buttercream, and what I'm doing here is I'm just mixing it around, making sure that it is nice and creamy and we have any air bubbles which may have developed from it being out removed. So we want to remove any air bubbles possible. So I'll also be using my acrylic scraper and a leveled spatula. So I'm starting off by putting a little bit of the icing on my cake board, and this is just to stick the cake onto the cake board to make sure that it doesn't shift. So I'm going to start off with my vanilla cake, and I'm just placing this at the bottom of the cake board and going ahead and putting some icing on top. And this is pretty much up to you. The more icing you do put inside, the more likely that the cake will be unstable, so you just want to gauge that and be careful with that. I'm then going with my offset spatula and I bring in the icing, making sure that it's all nice and smooth. I mean, at this point it's not 100% important that it's flat, but as flat as possible is good. I'm now going in with my red velvet layer and doing the exact same thing. So I'm putting some icing on top, just a little bit, and then going in with my offset spatula, bringing it in. As you see, I'm bringing it in from the sides first, and then I am just putting it around the cake, making sure it's flat. So now it's time for my final layer. I put this on upside down. It just creates a nice shape of the cake and make sure it's all nice and straight. And don't be afraid to push and prod the cake as and when needed to make sure that it turns out being straight. Sometimes cakes can move, especially when you're stacking them, so feel free to move them with your fingers. I then am just locking in the cake with the buttercream that is already on the cake, and now I'm adding in more buttercream. So I just put this around the sides of the cake. It doesn't need to be neat, it doesn't need to be fancy. because we are going to go in with our offset spatula and also our cake scraper. So you just want to put it in. I think I just put like 5 different strokes, vertical strokes on the side of the cake, and now I'm just going in with my offset spatula, starting from the top. It's the exact same movement as we did when we were filling the cakes. You just go around, bring the icing in, hold the spatula down, and the turntable will do the rest for you. So you start off with the top of the cake, and you'll see me pushing the cake because the cake is quite wobbly. This is because it is a red velvet cake in the mix, and also because my icing was a bit soft. So where possible, make sure that your icing is the right consistency. If you guys would like to see a video on that, please let me know. So once I've done the top, I come around the sides, basically just pushing in all the icing, making sure that it's covering the naked parts of the cake. And that is exactly what you want to have in your mind. Your job is to cover the naked parts of the cake from all the way from the top to the bottom, making sure that there's no naked part of the cake remaining. And once this is done, I just get my acrylic scraper and I just go around the cake. So you just want to go around the cake, not scraping the icing off. You hold the scraper at a 90-degree angle, as you can see I'm doing, and you're almost pushing the icing in, making sure that the cake is being smoothed whilst you're going around. And what you'll notice is that some icing will come off. It's always better to start off with more icing on the cake than little icing. If you have little icing, it will be a struggle to get that nice crumb coat. If you have more icing, you can just scrape it off. So pro tip, always start off with more icing than needed. So what you notice, you'll get to a point where your cake starts to become smoother and smoother, and less icing will come off. This is a sign that you are almost ready, and you just need to keep going until you are happy with the cake smoothness. So once that's done, you just want to take your offset spatula upside down, run it along the cake board, and this is to remove any of the icing that has been transferred on the board. If this isn't removed, this will harden once it's put into the fridge. Now I'm just going over the top of the cake where the lip has formed, and I am bringing that in just to make sure that we have a clean and clear top of the cake for our second layer of icing. Once that's all done, you then pop the cake in the fridge for about 20 minutes or so just to chill and to harden, and once it's done, you'll be ready for your second layer. So that's all for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. In the next video I will show you how I decorated this cake.